Hi, I'm Chris. This is Finding God at Work. Just a reminder that Finding God at Work isn't just a podcast, it's also an online course. Check it out at findinggodatwork.org. Our current series is Meaningful Work: Calling, Formation, Service, and Love. A couple episodes ago, I kind of had a throwaway comment. I mentioned that you, as a human person, can do your work out of love, and an AI could never do that. And I didn't really have a chance to unpack that, so I thought it might be good to take a couple episodes and unpack some ideas related to AI and related to love. So as we've kind of looked at these different aspects of meaning in our work, we've looked at calling, how God's purpose in our life gives meaning to our work. We've looked at formation, how God can use our work experiences, good and bad, to shape our character, to refine it, to make it more like the character of Jesus. We've looked at this idea of service and how service is a big component of how God shapes our character, but also service is part of how God accomplishes things in the world, part of how God images himself in the world through our work. And so now in the final few episodes of the series, we're going to look at love. Now, we've already looked at love in these other three parts because you can't look at calling, formation, and service without looking at love. But we're really going to kind of focus in on love and what love means here at the end of the series. So before I dive into AI, I want to do a little bit of philosophical work about the nature of love. And we've done this before in other series. We've talked about how to love someone is to will the good. And we've also talked about how there's another aspect of love, which is to be in union or communion with someone. So the two sides of love are willing the good, in as much as it's up to you to seek the good of the other person, the person who you're loving. And then there's this other piece, to be in communion or union with that person. And that sometimes depends on whether the other person is willing for that to be the case. So there's kind of two sides of love, seeking the good and being in union or communion. One of the thinkers about love who has been most helpful to me is St. John Paul II, the Pope. He was a couple popes ago now at this point, but I affectionately call him JP2, along with many of my brothers and sisters who appreciate Catholic theologians and thinkers, whether they themselves are Catholic or otherwise. And one of the things that JP2 focused on in his teaching was the nature of love. And there's this quote of his from a discourse he gave in 1980 that I just want to read here. So this is St. John Paul II. "The human person is a creature that God willed for his own sake. At the same time, he can fully discover his true self only in a sincere giving of himself." Okay, that was really dense, so I'm going to read it again. "The human person is a creature that God willed for his own sake. At the same time, he can fully discover his true self only in a sincere giving of himself." Okay, so two ideas there that St. John Paul II is putting forward. They're kind of in tension, but they actually go together. One is that God created the human person for his own sake. And JP2 here is using masculine pronouns just to have a singular, but it would be true of women too. So that a creature that God willed for his own sake, a creature that God willed for her own sake. And what's going on there is this idea that human beings are not a means to an end. Human beings are not tools. Human beings are not machines. Human beings are not just instruments or devices that we employ for some greater good other than the human being. Human beings are ends in themselves. Human beings were created for their own sake. They are good. They are very good, as God declared in the Genesis account of creation. They exist because it's good for human beings to exist. Okay, so that's one idea. But then this idea that might seem in tension with that idea is, at the same time, the human person can fully discover his true self only in a sincere giving of himself. Or herself, we could say. You only find out who you are when you give yourself away. You only find out who you are when you give yourself away. So even though human beings, and you as a human being, you are an end in yourself. You do not exist as an instrument for something else. You only discover who you really are when you give yourself away. When you love, when you choose to love something, someone beyond yourself, that's when you discover who you truly are. I just think this is so beautiful because there's this tension, there's this almost paradoxical nature where, it reminds me of passages where Jesus talks about it's only when you are willing to lose your life that you actually find it. It's the first who's the last, and the last who's the first. It's only when you give yourself away that you actually discover who you are. So love is, among other things, our path to self-discovery. It's our path to discovering who we really were meant to be. You don't find out who you are until you love, until you give yourself away. This is part of what it means to be a person, to be a human being, as distinct from a machine. Okay, so that's kind of a high-level overview of this idea of love and what it means to be human. Now, how does that relate to the idea of AI? Well, I had this really funny question occur to me, and that was this. Would an angel use AI? And this question occurred to me as I was thinking about our daily experience of work, because so many of my colleagues are using AI already. They're not just thinking about using it. I have a lawyer friend at church who's using AI every day, he says. It kind of saves him about an hour of time when he starts a new case. The research phase that he used to have to do manually, it just pulls together for him and he can get to work on the case itself. My friends at the food bank are using it to write grants or to think about how we refine our marketing and communication pieces. I even have a friend, he was interviewed on this podcast in an earlier series, Ben Crocker. He's launched a sermon feedback app. We'll have a link to that in the show notes if you're interested. Using AI. And I myself have started using AI. I use it a lot to listen to articles. When I'm driving in the car, if it doesn't have an audio version, I'll just put it through this app I like called Speechify, and it reads it to me. And it can even read it to me in specific people's voices, which is kind of crazy and fun. So I'm using AI. Many of my colleagues are using AI. But would an angel use AI? And I don't mean like a Hollywood angel, like Clarence from It's a Wonderful Life, who's kind of bumbling and well-intentioned. I mean a biblical angel, someone who ministers the presence of the holy. And when this question occurred to me, my gut instinct was, no, an angel wouldn't use AI. But then I kind of had to question myself, well, why do I think that, right? Because angels in the Bible, they use other kinds of human technology like stairways or swords or staffs or trumpets or scrolls, right? The angels use all sorts of tools, kind of heavenly analogs to human technology, I guess. But it just doesn't seem right to imagine an angel holding a smartphone and opening an app to get something done. It seems laughable. Why is that? Well, my best guess is that there's something about the simplicity of these ancient technologies like swords and staves that we see in the Bible that makes them fitting conduits for angelic ministry. But complex digital technology is remote in its functioning. So even if you're holding a smartphone in your hand, it's actually sending messages to a server that's somewhere far away, right? The effect isn't right there. It's removed. It's indirect. And angels, rather than being removed or indirect, are all about presence, right? This is how angels kind of describe their work and their ministry. So think about in the book of Joshua, right? This is before the siege of Jericho, or it wasn't really a siege, they just marched around it, right? But before that happens, Joshua's confronted by the commander of the army of the Lord. This is in Joshua chapter 5. And then in verses 14 and 15, this angel, this commander of the army of the Lord says, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." The place where you are standing is holy. The place, it's about presence. Why is it holy? Because the angel is there. And through the angel, God is there. When God shows up in a place, that place becomes holy and it needs honor. You need to remove your sandals, to acknowledge, wow, God is here. There's an intense recognition of presence. That's what angels minister. And so the question for me is, if angelic ministry is so intensely about presence that it's laughable to think about an angel using a smartphone, what about our work, our human work? Couldn't our human work also be about presence a lot of the time? And I don't want to make sweeping generalizations here. Like, to be human is to be present, therefore AI is bad, right? That kind of like Luddite, all or nothing thinking, that's not nuanced. That's not dealing with the complexity of the issues, especially because the term AI can describe so many different technologies, right? And the technology is always changing, right? It's doing things now that it couldn't do before. So we've got to evaluate these things with discernment. But even as we evaluate things with discernment, I think it's important for us to think about presence. Like, what does presence mean, right? Like the place you are standing as opposed to all other places. There's a sense of distinctness, of limitation, right? It's like this place out of all other places. And that's a feature of human work that's different than AI. So for example, think about the difference between a human author and an AI. Each human author has a particular and distinct features, and not just of what they wrote, but of what they didn't write, right? In education, there's this concept called the null curriculum, and that's why you teach by not ever mentioning it, right? You choose to teach certain things and not to teach others, and that says something too. Well, that's true of every writer. So writers have what we call a body of work. Just like the human body, it has a starting place and a stopping place. And, sometimes it's a little flabby in certain places, right? Not every passage from every author is the chef's kiss thing that you love from that author. And so there's this sense of, again, what does human work look like? In this example with writing, I would say distinctiveness and limitation are part of what it means to be a human author. And that's a feature, not a bug. That's a good thing. The distinctiveness and limitation means I can get to know the author's voice. I can anticipate that I want to get more of their input because I've gotten to know them from the distinctions and limitations of their earlier choices. AI doesn't work like that. I can't get to know the body of work of AI because it's just sourcing millions and millions and millions of inputs. It doesn't have this distinctness and this limitation that a human authorial voice does. Okay, so this might seem a little bit abstract, right? Like okay, maybe with authors, but what about with my daily work? So let's get practical. What about your daily work is maybe like that, where it's about that intensity of presence? It's about that distinctiveness and that limitation. Sometimes the inefficiency is the point. Think about writing a handwritten thank you note. This is something that I do a lot at the food bank because I work with our donors. I write them thank you notes for their donations. What makes the handwritten thank you note meaningful? It's not just what it says. It's the fact that a human being took time to write it. It's limited. It's personal. It's something that I took time to do versus everything else I could have done with that time. And think about on the receiving end, right? What is it like for you when you get an automated computer printed thank you note, which, right, clearly there was no particular attention given to that note specifically out of all the hundreds or thousands that ran off the printer, versus if you receive a handwritten thank you note specifically to you from a human being who wrote it with their own hand. It has a deeper impact. It has more meaning because of the distinctiveness, right? The handwriting of that particular person, because of the limitation that person had to give time and energy and focus to do it. So sometimes inefficiency is the point. And I would argue that when we're communicating love, right? When we're communicating, I want to seek what's good for you, and maybe I want to connect with you, I want to enter into communion or union with you, sometimes that takes inefficiency. Sometimes that can't be done at scale. There's a Christian scholar, I personally know him because we live in the same area, we used to go to the same church, named Reed Schuchart, and he writes this, and I just love this line. He says, "The opposite of love is not hatred, it is efficiency." Ooh, the opposite of love is not hatred, it is efficiency, right? Oh man, that's challenging. And again, I don't want to be sweeping with this. There are things that it's good to do efficiently. Sometimes mass production is the right answer when it's not about that personal touch. But I think we need discernment to pay attention to what aspects of our work really are about that personal touch, and not be too fast to use AI just because it's fast. To not be too efficient just to use AI because it's efficient. Sometimes the inefficiency is the point. Sometimes love requires us to do what Schuchart calls, quote, the slow, difficult work of embodying God's love, one embodied soul at a time. Lord Jesus, thank you. Thank you for the ministry of angels, for the ministry of presence, for how you invite us to love with distinction, with individuality, with limitations. Show us how to live inside those limitations well and how to make discerning choices about the use of AI and other tools we might have at our disposal in our work. Jesus, do your work in us as we do our work with you. Amen.
Thanks for listening. Finding God at Work is a production of Mission Central, a ministry based in Aurora, Illinois, dedicated to forming Christians for mission in everyday life. You can subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to this episode to get 10 minutes of teaching on faith and work every Tuesday and Thursday. To get resources to go deeper with each podcast series, read our blog, and get info about upcoming courses on faith in the workplace, go to our website, missioncentral.church.